Otukashila, Wakantanka, Namakompo, Natateo Atopa, Na Unshimaka, Ahituayan Gale. Oyate Oyasin Chankoluto, Namale Ochakiapo. Oyate Oyasin Unchi, which Alapono Ochakiapo, Helter, which was only was state when you were big. Oyade, Ihani Lakovichanaka, Okichiapia Kyo, Kipi, Shante Tabo, Lakina, Mapechus e Pelo. Ihani Lakovich Waki Tunkashi the Kisuye, Oyate Oyasin, Chankoluto, Oknamane Ochakiapo. Shantiata, Wogelaki. Ihani Lakovich Waki Tunkashi the Kisuye. Metagoyas.
Rabia.
Thank you for this day, for every breath in and every breath out, for the ability to listen, to hear, to speak truth from heart. Thank you for the wisdom that you flow through us. Thank you for our being just a part of your magnificence. We thank ourselves and our guides also for stepping up and stepping out in this crucial time. We send the loving vibration all over this planet to every single living thing. And we ask that our humility be the most, and gratitude be the most fourth thoughts in our minds, hearts, and spirits. And with that, we say thank you, thank you, thank you.
Ashe, ashe. And let us take just a few moments to hold those invocations in our hearts and minds and reverence the silence. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you all for being here today. We're thrilled to have this conversation, which is a culminative talk following a series we did focusing on Indigenous and Maroon projects that are stewarding water stewardship, and it is an extension of our Proven Sustainable website and project, highlighting the significance of learning from and supporting Indigenous and Maroon perspectives, ways of being when it comes to healing our collective humanity and Earth, and what it really means to be sustainable. And on the call today, we're going to kind of kick off some introductions here. As K2 referenced, I'm Kelsey, and I oversee kind of the project management and the director of the various moving pieces with our newsletter, website, and conversations. I'm also playing the producer role, and we'll be following up for these conversations and making them into material for us all to use into our daily lives. We're also joined by Sox Sperry, who is the founder of Proven Sustainable, longtime educator, curriculum developer, social reform advocate, and we are also here with one of our guiding council members of Proven Sustainable, for Arrows, who led the opening, and he is a renowned educator, researcher, scholar, and large advocate for Indigenous worldviews and education globally. Then we also have K2, who is facilitating, master facilitator, journalist, incredible human overall. And I'm going to kick it over to you now, K2, to introduce Fred and Rabia.
It is really my pleasure to introduce my favorite blacksmith in the world, Fred Tutman, who is the Patuxent Waterkeeper. And Fred has a long list of accomplishments as a media person, civic advocate, law and legal educator, and somebody who has a feel for the river and the people that comes through in everything that he says, and deep appreciation for Fred's being here. And grandmother Rabia Noor, who is Fred's right hand, left hand, upper hand.
I didn't say that, Fred. Don't come for me.
At the Patuxent. And just we got an opportunity to meet them both in a conversation that we recently had, and I would advise all on this call to go to that conversation and just listen to the spirit and the wisdom that is there. And with that, kick it over to my brother, founder, Sox Berry.
Thank you, K2. And I'm delighted to have everyone on the call. And it's my honor to introduce Alan Herrera, whose work I first became familiar with in the 1990s. Alan, I read Elder Brothers, was so deeply moved by it, brought the film that you made from the heart of the earth, from the heart of the world, Elder Brothers Warning, to a study group in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I was. We had a great conversation about that back in the time. And then fast forward when I began the website, wanting to make donations to as many assemblies as I could within the website, you were the person I reached out to in terms of supporting Kogi people's work through the organization you founded, the Tyrona Trust.
And I grabbed your hand with ferocity.
and you were right there responding to me and saying, here's how we can connect. And I so appreciate that. I also just want to mention the remarkable film Aluna that you helped the Kogi create. I love the last scene in particular when you immerse yourself in the water, because it's so central to the theme of what we're doing here today, in the water together in community and in reverence. So I'm really grateful to have you on this call today. And with that, I'll pass it back to K2.
Thank you, Sox, and thank you everyone for being here. The central theme is water, and I just want to begin the conversation with words from Saga Narcissa, who is Kogi Mama. Okay. To us, water is female. Mistreating a woman is mistreating water. That's some deep stuff. But there's some other deep stuff from people on this call, and I want to go there as well before we begin. From Fred Tutman. The river was our playground as kids. It was where we got food. My family watered their crops from this river. My great-grandfather farmed tobacco and other crops and fished for yellow perch there. From grandmother Rabia Noor, ceremony is imperative. Ceremony and ritual are part of who we are. From Wahinke Topa, 4 Arrows. In the indigenous way of being in the world, spirits entwine with nature. Spirituality is at the core of being indigenous to our planet. And from Soxbury, I've had the great fortune to be led by circles of mentors. These elders are the planters who have sowed the seeds for this project. And in that, for me, the crossroads in all of those words, and at the juncture of all of your lives, the crossroads is the meeting at the way of spirit. And so the first question, I want to begin with a dialogue code from Proven Sustainable. Water is the mother of all forms of life and gives life to mountains, plains, stones. It keeps the universe in balance. Without women or water, there could be no reproduction. So we drink water to cool and to refresh ourselves. And that's, again, Sarga Nesisa from the Kogi. And the question that I want to begin with, and I will start with you, Alan. In your life and in your work, how have water and women cooled and refreshed you?
Yeah, I could. Okay. Let's start with the easy one, which is the water. One day when I was with the Kogi, filming with them, it was Christmas Day, and this is a story going to take a few minutes. Mama Valencia, the oldest and most senior mama, my teacher, said that he would tell the story of how the world began if we came to him that day. So we climbed up to where he was. It was a very long, difficult climb. We had our equipment on mules, but the mules were unable to make the climb, so we had to do it ourselves without. It was pretty hot, pretty sticky, as it always is. We arrived there exhausted. We sat down in front of him, and I said, Mama Valencia, you were going to tell me how the world began. And he said, yes, I did say that, but that's because I knew that was the best way to get you here. I'm not going to talk about it. And we went on, had the most extraordinary conversation. It was spectacular. But I mean, one of the points he was making was, of course, that the Kogi were in charge and manipulating and running the whole show, which they always are. And at the end of it, we packed up, we went back down. And you understand, I was a novice in the jungle. I had never been. This was my first extended trip. And I was terrified of the whole experience. And we came back down. All the time that I was in the jungle up to that point, I had been jealous of the Spanish conquistadores. I well understood the desire to wear armor and insulate yourself against everything that surrounds you in this place. And as we came back down and I was exhausted, I said to the Kogi who I was with and who were looking after me, I now need to go and rest. And they said, no, you don't. That's not what you do. You need to be renewed. Take off all your clothes. Take off your shoes. Take off everything. Except your underpants. You can wear your underpants. So I stripped down to effective nakedness in the jungle, and they walked me through the jungle in that condition. An area which I thought of totally as hostile, filled with things that would eat me. And they brought me to a section of the river which had a big whirlpool in it. And they said, now you go in there. Are you sure? Oh, yes. You go in and you will be renewed, restored, reborn. And I went in, and that's exactly what happened. And the water embraced me, is the only way I can put it. It totally took over, looked after me, moved me around at whatever speeds it wanted, and finally deposited me. And I emerged a different person because I now knew I was going to be safe here. I was going to be looked after. The water and the jungle were taking care of me. And I walked back. And that experience of being, remade in the water was something that, in a way, that was reflected at the end of Aluna. Although I hadn't intended it to be, that was the Kogi again running the whole show. I didn't know what was going to happen. But that is the answer, certainly, about water. I don't think I need to talk about women, do I?
Fred, thank you for that, Alan. That was wonderful. Fred, you inserted something into the chat. Why don't you speak to that and then speak to being cooled by water and women?
So I've never verified the details, but I've been told several times that Algonquin speaking tribes on the Chesapeake are who named the Patuxent River, and that the word Patuxent was taken to mean either water running over smooth stones, but it was sometimes a term that could be applied to a beautiful woman, that these Algonquin speaking tribes considered the ideas to be similar, water running over smooth stones and a very attractive female. So that's intriguing. Like I said, I'm not fluent in Algonquin. I don't know if anyone is. Not a written down language, but that's intriguing to me that those were compatible ideas. You know.
You were raised on that river. You grew up on that river. How did that river embrace you?
So
to
notably,
bring you back all those years later, to bring you back to your founding place?
well, oddly, the river was something very different. When I was growing up in the 60s, it was a segregated river. I couldn't really get to the best parts of that river, right? Before the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and even thereafter, it was the difficult place to get to unless you were near an underpass or a bridge or a public crossing. That the prime lands next to the river were largely controlled by farmers who were white, and they were freeholds for people who had particular privilege. Right? If we wanted to go swimming in that river that belonged to everyone, we had to go find the nearest underpass and go under a bridge. And oddly, my mother told me that trolls lived under bridges. so as kids, we were terrified sometimes going into those underpasses. Now, what we thought a troll was, she said, was someone who didn't take their vitamins. So we had these creatures living under these bridges, as attractive as the river was to swim in, and yet we had to kind of balance that against our fear of these non-vitamin taking trolls. but humor aside, childhood stories aside, you know, I think it was fate in a way that brought me back to the river of my birth. I didn't have a full appreciation for it because I didn't know the full scope of it. I didn't even know where it came from and where it went. I knew it came from that away and went the other way, but I didn't know what those destinations were. So as an adult, well into adulthood, actually in my 40s, I actually undertook to really explore that river and find out as much as I could about it. And a little anecdote, I wanted to find the headwaters. And so I drove all over the GPS device in the north of the river, trying to find those headwaters unsuccessfully. And then I saw a guy smoking a pipe sitting on a stump. And I said, "Excuse me, sir, do you know where the headwaters of the Patuxent are?" And he said, "I don't know nothing about no headwaters, young man, but the river starts right over there." But I felt it was my obligation to learn as much as I could because I saw myself as kind of an avatar or a connection point for others to connect to this river. And I think that's an exciting part of the work that we do. I think I'm naturally attracted to community. And I tell people that I run a community-based organization where community is defined by a watershed. Really, there's a community of people who are connected in all kinds of ways to this particular river, to all rivers. Actually, water is connected, I think, by its very nature. And so I'll stop there. But that's how I feel the river has embraced me, is that I came full circle from having a dim idea about what this river was about to essentially being an advocate that's kind of central to the aspirations of people who want to protect this river.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you, Fred. And Grandmother Rabia, you started out on the West Coast, as I remember, with the Great Pacific, with the big
Yes.
water.
The big water.
How has water cooled and water and women cooled you?
Oh, we didn't hear Fred's woman story, but okay. So, well, I think it's cooled me in many ways because I've always I can remember, thinking back as a child, I was in, rarely, as they say, rains in California, but whenever it did, I would just be running out the front door and standing out in the rain like, wow, give it to me, bring it on. And the other piece is that I've always been very connected to the moon. So I can remember as a child, those two things being very important and very nurturing to me. I would sit out at night in the driveway when the moon was full and just sit and communicate with her. And then as I got older, I was informed about the cycles of the moon and the tide and women's flow with their blood and all of these things. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. Well, I think that it nurtures me and it cools me, because when I get very, very hyper stressed, my friends will call and say, you need to go to the ocean. We can feel it. Go to the ocean. So when I need to get myself straight or right or in a good space, it's always the water. And if I can't get to water, I'll get a bowl of water and I'll just sit and look at that bowl of water and communicate with that. There are so many ways for us to cool ourselves off spiritually, because that's basically where I'm coming from and what I deal with. I feel like when we were growing up, my mother had us learn how to swim at a very, very young age. I think we were like, less than 5. She had many people in her family drown: her father, her oldest sister, brother, a cousin. And she was terrified of the water, where I was like, where's the water, and ready to jump in. And so she made sure we all could swim from a very young, very, very young age, my sisters and I. And so we were in the ocean growing up, and I blessed my mother. That's my experience with the woman part. My mother made sure that we got to the ocean. She made sure that we went to swimming pools. She packed up the whole neighborhood of kids and took us to pools to swim. We went to lakes. As I'm thinking back, water was always present in some form in my life. And that was due to my mother, my father's love of fishing and being at the water. And so I think that whole nurturing of having water present, even if it wasn't spoken of, but very present physically, spiritually, mentally, and seeing it and immersing myself in it. It was something my mother told me years and years later. She was laughing. She said, "You are my little medicine woman." And I said, "Oh, thanks, Mom." And she's like, "There was something about you I never understood, but I knew that there was something that was important for me to just let you be." I had many opportunities as a child to be there.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And for arrows, same question. Cooling, water and women.
I think about when we were at Standing Rock. I did 4 tours of duty there, and mini Wachoni became a very popular phrase. And people just thought, well, it just means water, but it's more complicated. The Lakota idea of ni Wachona is easily defined in English as water is life, but even that's not sufficient. Ni, the Ni, is life, but it also refers to mother's milk. But when you put the M in front of it, it says, I've been told it brings a reference to the oneness of you and me, of everything. So water is sort of the time and space that defines Mother Earth in every way, from a baby's tears to the ocean waves out my back door here. And it's our first consciousness. It reflects the cosmos. It's a synergy that becomes sort of a being that binds all of life. And I'm not doing it justice from how it was explained to me, but every morning the women would guide us down to the river, and the men would line up and put their hands out so that the women would not slip going down the embankment, and then they would lead a song about water, as they put tobacco into the river that we were trying to protect. And so this idea of ni with shoni in a Lakota, and it's, you know, it's very similar. If you know, when I was with the Kogi mamas, they would nod their head as my translator was telling to, you know, explain this. It's very similar in indigenous cultures around the world. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Quarles. And Socks, who grew up there on the Atlantic.
Well, my earliest memories of walking along the New Jersey seashore were beachcombing with my grandmother, Catherine. And we'd get up early every morning, and I would hold her hand, and we would walk along the low tide line looking for treasures. And actually, I still have one of those treasures right by my desk. This is a piece of wood, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's a hole in it. Driftwood that came from someplace, and it ended up on the shore, and my grandma picked it up, very smooth, and it's been with me as long as any material object in my life. And there is something about this hole as a portal to everything before and everything after. And it's a deep tie to my grandma. That's my connection.
All right. Thank you. Let's get into the work that brings all of us together. Alan, you're a filmmaker, you're an educator, and you're a student of the Kogi. Question that I have is that deep education that the Kogi mamas get to become a mama, that dive into darkness and into the silence. Can you elucidate that some? Can you speak to that?
Well, yes, you're asking me about an experience which by definition I could never have had, and which I can only speculate about. I think the fundamental element in all this is something that you are all talking about, which is what is it that connects everything together? And what it is that connects everything together, one word for that in the Kogi language is the word that gets translated as water. It's also, we translate that word sometimes as spirit. It's, you know, Thales, the ancient Greek philosopher, said everything is water. And the Kogi experience that what a mama is trying to do, this is going to be very complicated and difficult for me. What a mama is trying to do to understand the world is to understand all the connections that he can perceive or grasp. Because we work very mechanistically, we want all these different elements of the world to be separable and countable and be able to pick them up one after another and somehow put them together and make sense of them in some kind of analytic way. But of course, the world is infinitely complex and you can't hope to do that, and it's meaningless. So what has to happen is that you have to actually become part of it. You have to enter into this world of which you are part. And somehow a process of communication takes place between your consciousness and the larger consciousness, which conveys to you things that you would otherwise be unable to know. And in this process, the world becomes your teacher in a way that it is very difficult for people like myself to have the faintest idea what is going on. But this is, so when they're talking about water and also talking about the feminine and talking about pretty much everything, what they're doing is going into a way of knowing that allows them to understand the world of which they are part. And that is what this whole education is about. And the separation from the physical experience of the material world that they go through in these years of darkness is a way of not being subjected to what I have come to describe as the hallucination of reality that we all inhabit. And this hallucination of reality, which is after all something that is invented in our own minds, everything that we perceive about material reality is invented in our own minds. Colors don't exist, sounds don't exist. All these things are created by our astonishing form of consciousness. And we walk through this world which doesn't exist outside of us, but which is connected all the time and conveyed to us. But we make something else out of it. But living in the darkness, that doesn't happen in the same way to the Kogi trainee. So when he emerges into the world, that hallucination hits him in a kind of bomb-like way for the first time. And I have certainly spoken to Kogi mamas who've had that experience of coming out of the darkness at the end of their education and being shocked to their core by the experience of meeting the material world. It means that they can know things in a way that I can't. And this is the constantly humiliating thing for me, because their forms of knowledge have much more instantaneousness than mine. Mine has to be arrived at piece by piece and piecemeal and working at it. And often it takes me months to understand something that's been said to me by a Kogi. Whereas their knowledge is just there, they're part of it, it's instant. And I'm constantly learning from that experience. And when it comes to water, of course, they're bewildered by my inability to comprehend water. You see that in Aluna. I cannot hear the water speak. I can't listen to the water. I don't know where the water is. I don't perceive the water as being the medium that I inhabit. Not just the water flowing down in a stream or a river, but also the water passing around me in the air, passing above me in the clouds, passing under my feet in the ground. And they are fully conscious of the entire multidimensional, and I mean multidimensional complexity of the wet world. So there are things that I'm constantly learning from. And the latest thing to me, we're talking about the restoration project that we're trying to do on the land, with the area they live in, this coastal, what was forest, coastal forest. One of the things that they do talk about in Aluna is where the clouds come from, and they're very specific about, they know where each cloud comes from. They know where it's born. They know where it travels. Now science has begun to recognize that that knowledge is correct. What I didn't know, and I've only just learned, is that the water that gets brought up from the sea and taken into the coastal forest and deposited as rain there, some of it passes through the forest, passes into the ground, passes down, becomes the rivers, becomes the moisturization of the forest. But some of it stays in the tree. And some of what remains in the tree ultimately evaporates off from the crown of the tree and goes up and forms a new part of a new cloud. And that cloud travels in the same direction as the original cloud, that is from the sea inland. And that is the cloud which waters the Amazon. The inland forests are watered by the sea, whose water is transmitted by the shoreline forests. I had no idea of that. Their knowledge of this is also profound. And that's how it's acquired. It's not acquired through our forms of education, but through the world speaking to them.
Fred, what did you hear in that?
Well, I hear this cycle of renewal and the connection of all things, and something that's integral to who we are as a human species. We're connected to these things. We're not objective observers. We're in it. We're a part of it. I hear a lot of things. You know, that's really what attracted me to the Waterkeeper movement. I went to a speech given by the founder, and he talked about how when people want inspiration, they don't go to the shopping mall, they go to nature. They go to the desert or the mountain or the ocean or river. And that was the first time in my life, and that was in my 40s, like I said, I heard an environmentalist talk about something other than science. It blew my mind, because I always had that sense of connection, that there was more to these resources than just the science. And tragically, there are a lot of waterkeepers who think that's all there is anyhow. But for me, the light went on, like, oh, here's something where I can engage, because this is real to me. I had a lifetime up until that point of experiencing nature firsthand. I had walked up some mountains and been to as many interesting beaches and had been into bouldering and going to places where I thought we should, essentially, humans should transact firsthand. Go see for yourself. When I was a boy, I never told my parents at the time. I was about 13. We lived about 40 steps from the Indian Ocean in Dar es Salaam. And one day, the ocean wasn't friendly. I went out, as I did every morning, and it was usually because it was the day of a sea storm. I mean, a heck of a storm. And so I grabbed my boogie board and decided to go swim in a sea storm. I wanted to test myself against nature. Not against, but I wanted to experience it firsthand. I wanted to be able to say, I swam in a sea storm, and what was that like? And that storm kicked my butt. Threw me several times across coral, up on the beach, sprawled. I mean, I was no match for that storm. But that sense of connection, that sense of very personal connection, this is me in the storm working some stuff out. That was formative for me. And it stuck with me for the rest of my life. And so I kept looking for a duplication of that experience on mountains, on beaches, wherever I could find it. I wanted the real thing. I wanted to meet Mother Nature firsthand. And I think that's an important lesson to share for people to experience. Don't read about it in a book. Don't watch it on the Discovery Channel. Go see. If you can, go see it and experience it. As I've aged, I've lost some of the physical capacity to endure those adventures. And that's been a real loss for me, quite frankly. Maybe I'll be stuck with watching on the Discovery Channel. But it was important to me to have had those experiences in my life, because I felt it connected me to Mother Nature in a very particular way. I felt like I knew what I was talking about when I was talking to people about a sea storm or about a mountain or about nature. So that's what I got.
Came in. The knowledge, the experience turned into wisdom. Mother Rabia, Grandmother Rabia, what are you hearing in this conversation?
I'm hearing the willingness to be in nature and to allow nature to flesh out your spirit, to be able to appreciate that we are very small in the equation of things. But if we have the willingness and the open heart to be one with nature, she will meet you where you are, and she'll give you gifts, and she will expand your consciousness so that you want more. And I think the reverence comes with that. When you get more and you start to say, aha, look what happened to me, and have this deep appreciation for those experiences. And I think, being able to realize how, and it's not small in a bad way, but just to understand that we are just a small piece of something, and how much food and in the creative force that there is in all of these things, and their willingness to teach you. And then when you're open and you become humble enough to accept those teachings, how your life becomes so rich and so full.
Thank you. Flowers, what are you hearing in this conversation that connects, that resonates?
Well, I couldn't help but put something in the chat box that Alan said, this idea of this instancy of understanding the depth and deepness of the interconnections that everybody's talking about, not letting the illusions of our hypnosis get in the way of understanding that deep interconnection. One of the things, Alan, and everybody that that I found quite interesting when I was with the Kogi is they had the people that were sponsoring me had built a temescal for an anipi ceremony, a Lakota ceremony, sweat lodge ceremony, and we invited the mamas to come in with us, and they very respectfully declined, because for them just moving a stone on the trail is not allowed. And here I am taking stones, I'm going to put them into a fire. And they very respectfully, said, well, before we accept your invitation, we have to go back to the community. So they had to go, walk for another 7 hours back up the hill to meet and talk about whether or not this was something that they could accept. And I think that this idea of this depth and this of a knowledge that comes from some other place and that's communal. It's because it's involved with community. It's just resonating with me a lot. So I'm going to give so much thanks to everyone.
My surfing brother.
Well, again, I'm thinking about those years walking the Atlantic shoreline as a young boy, and once I let go of my grandmother's hand and decided that I would enter the water, my first memories of actually being physically in the water, I was probably 4 or 5, was just lying in the shore break and allowing the water to move me up and down between the sand and then pulling me back into the ocean, closing my eyes, feeling that deeply sensate experience, surrounded by water, rocked and rolled, and then graduating from that to little inflatable mattresses that we would take out and then ride into the beach, and then eventually stand up surfing, which of course our Hawaiian ancestors discovered as a powerful way to move between the unknown and the known world, the ocean and the shoreline. And so I'm thinking in this conversation, what does it require of me to enter into these places of deep spirit and awareness? And for me, it's vulnerability. When I let go of my grandma's hand and place myself in the shore break, I had to be vulnerable, humble, in the face of this force that was so much greater than myself, and a willingness to enter the unknown, taking me back to the Kogi and Fred's story about the sea storm spot. I'll also finish my part by saying I'm recalling the conversation we had with Aroha Spinks, Maori elder and scientist, where she talked about the intertidal zone of knowing between Maori tradition and Western science. And I feel as though this conversation to me is about closing our eyes and moving into that intertidal zone.
Kelsey, I want to bring you into this conversation because you have such a keen awareness of detail. What are you hearing?
Well, thank you, K2. Definitely want to echo much of what's been said around a sense of connection and collective and unity, and going off of Fred's sharing about the storm waters, and then Sachs being within that water, rocking him back and forth. I think what comes to mind for me is I have started reunited also to a morning practice of going to the shore every morning at sunrise and trying to get even to a beach as much as possible. And I think the one thing I want to add to that is a notion of pace, and that Alan was saying, like, that the Kogi just immediately know from nature these wisdom that we tend to fraction and then analyze and try to make sense of. And there's something about embodying and being reminded of the way things are and should be for our health and like collective sustainability around. I just have it's been very powerful for me to feel and to hear and to witness the pace of the waves and the tide and the birds calling and the wind around me first thing in the morning, and to try to continue to remain grounded in that, which can be so easily lost. I think in our Western society, we come back and we're on a computer like this, and you're getting a million emails and dings and social media and expectations, and all of a sudden the pace comes like right, and it's not natural. It's controlled by algorithms and expectations to produce and to respond, and so then that leads to us, I believe, right, being disconnected. Like, it's just, I think there's definitely something very powerful about trying to help people remember, as you've said before, our source and our connection. And most people nearly shower every single day. We're drinking water. We are water in a large way. And we don't think of how we need to actually learn from and care for that water, similar to the Indigenous and Maroon peoples who are more prominently speaking to that awareness and living in union with that awareness.
I so resonate with this conversation. And as I said at the outset, for me, the connection is spirit. There's a crossing at the crossroads. For me, the crossroads are everything, where things come together, where consciousness comes into the foreground of our experience as these beings that we are here on this planet. And knowing without being able to tell you how I know that it's all connected. I know it because I feel it. And I feel it because I do it. It's all connected. And this conversation is a reflection of the healing that we have entered into as a people, but don't yet have the ability to see because of the distractions that Kelsey just spoke to. And in my mind, I keep hearing that hammer and that anvil, Fred. I keep hearing the hammer and the anvil, which for me goes back to the Mande people of West Africa, goes back to the Yoruba and Ogun. It goes back to our fundamental engagement with nature and how what nature has taught us has allowed us to be here. And that's why I so revere the experience of the mamas. And Sachs, you introduced me to the mamas back in the 90s. Okay, you introduced me to Alan's work back then. What is it that y'all want to say to one another? I'm going to get out of the conversation. I need y'all to talk to one another. What do you need to say to one another? And 4 hours, I see you brought your family into the conversation.
Well, this is the boys here are all getting ready to go into to do an Anipi ceremony. We've turned the fire is ready, but I said this is a ceremony that we're doing now, And I want you to hear these voices of these individuals who have dedicated their lives to understanding spirit. And so I'm really honored for them to be able to hear each of you and your words.
Grandmother, it is women have been my waterway to the position that I am here now. Reaching 78 is simply because I had the internal ability to know that women were the course that I had to follow. Grandmother, what is it about the knowledge of women that we are missing today in our engagement? And when I say our, I'm talking about the societies, the collective societies of the world. What are the politicians and the other folks missing by leaving women out of this conversation?
Survival, respect. They have no respect for women. And actually, you know, our survival depends on everybody, but it also has to go back to the beginning. In the beginning, women were not happy for their own survival. They were not disrespected and misused and abused the way that they are today. So they were able to spend more time with the land and in and on the land. Throughout everybody's probably childhood, or most people's, they always had somebody in their family that was a gardener. They had women that were putting their hands in the earth, and that connection kept them strong and kept them informed. And they were able to do things and provide for their families in ways that people were like, they say, you know, they could make something out of nothing. Yeah, they could, but it wasn't out of nothing. It was out of the feelings. And even when they didn't remember mentally some of the things that were passed down through the generations, their spirit remembered, maybe not their consciousness. I think that, well, I know that, you know, my experiences with different tribes, different women, indigenous people, people from all over the world, there was a reverence and a love for water, for nature. They didn't waste water. They sang to the wind, they listened. There are whole, you know, women in the Philippines that they learned their sacred songs by just sitting up on a cliff and listening to the wind sing. And as they become more in tune, they know what the songs are that they sing to the water, and then they make bamboo flutes and they play that song to the water for healing. There's so many things, like when my father passed, and he asked me before he crossed over, and he told my sister he wanted me to do the ceremony for him. And I gathered 7 of the women in our family came together to the ocean, to the Pacific, where he loved and I loved. And I asked, and this is, I think, the developing of the consciousness and the love for, and the knowing that you can connect with water as your mother, as a healing source. I asked because there were people on the beach. I found one spot that was kind of free of people, and I looked to both sides, and I just prayed, and I said to them while we do this ceremony, and I asked Spirit, please take my father's ashes, probably going to get arrested, back to you. And I went out and we did some offerings. I sang some songs. The water came rushing at us very quickly. And my nieces were like, anybody that doesn't want to get wet, don't stand by her. And so ran up, and some stayed with me. But that water came just like this, directed only to where we were standing, came, took the offerings, went back. And I'm looking at both sides, and some people are looking, but that water was in its natural flow on either side of us. That water came and took the offerings and went back. And then I thanked Spirit, and the water became like the rest of the water. That's happened to me at Lake Atitlan, and you know, where we were in a storm on that river, and the boat captain was scared to death because he was like, you know, there are whirlwinds whirlpools that I was connecting with that too, that developed there. I'm hanging over the side of the boat, having a great time, looking down into the water, and he's like, "Tell her to get down, tell her to get down." And but I'm safe. I don't have that fear that anything can happen to me because I'm in communication with that water, and I don't have those barriers. I think, well, I know that the best thing that we can do for our children, get them off social media, get them off these iPads and iPhones. Everybody's got a phone. Even little kids now are sitting looking at phones all the time. And it disrupts and disconnects their ability to communicate and to be one with nature, because it's blocking with all this overwhelming stuff that's going on all the time. There's no peace of mind. There's no, people are afraid of the water. They're afraid of trees. They're afraid of nature. They're afraid of bugs. They're just so, skittish. So to be able to just start at the beginning, take your babies out when they're born, when you bring them home, take them out like we did, and my son-in-law put their hands to the tree that was in front of and introduced the baby to the tree and the baby. And it was, my kids and grandkids have never been afraid of nature. And I feel so distressed that there are so many kids now and adults that won't take their shoes off. They won't touch the earth. They don't want to, they get around water and they become frightened. And I'm like, do you not understand that this fear that you have of something so integral and a part of you and a part of your spirit blocks your whole communication with these things, and how much richer your life would be if you just surrender.
Thank you. I want to bring Alan back into this conversation. Alan, do you have anything that you want to ask Fred, who's the Patuxent Riverkeeper?
Yeah, I was absolutely intrigued by the things he was talking about and the history of his river and his history with that river, which I thought was just fascinating. I've got to be quite clear. I am an urban person who's had no experience of nature whatever. I'm completely, I grew up breathing diesel fumes and petrol fumes, living opposite railway sidings. And this has been the place of my life, all my life. So my experience with native people has been one of largely of ignorance and bewilderment and profound caution. That was why the story about my stripping off in the jungle was so central to me, because, I was talking about an area of terror, and everything that I've been involved in my life has been basically trying to kill me from the time I was born in London in the middle of the Second World War. That's how the world has been. The only thing that I would like to just throw in, if I may, is look, one thing I did adopt from my 30s onwards is sailing. And sailing has been my only connection, really, with the attraction of sailing for me is that the sea is the last wild place left in the world. It's the place which humans have not been able to transform into something else. And being in a small boat, sailing out of sight of land, and trying to understand where I am and what is happening and connect to the sea and through the sea to the nature, to the world and the cosmos, has been quite important for me. I hear very little conversation about that sort of thing. Obviously, somebody who comes from Hawaii is rooted in the sea. Is that right, Sox? That's where you're from?
No, actually, I'm from the Atlantic coast of New Jersey.
Oh, right. Sorry.
But I was honoring the Hawaiian ancestors who brought surfing to me across the world.
Yeah. And I've spent time on boats with people who are what the Norse word is a farman, a man who understands the nature of the sea and the waves and can traverse them. And that has been my closest connection with nature, actually. My connection with the Kogi is as an observer, a listener, a transmitter, but not as an understander. And the connection is really that I do not understand. And my whole life is spent trying to learn something that I could understand. And the project that I'm engaged in now, this project called Munich and Masha, in which the Kogi are finally trying to really teach us something specific and clear and concrete that we can use, to me is tremendously important, because what I am talking about all the time here is my profound ignorance, not that I'm a keeper of any kind of knowledge. I'm the opposite of that.
Fred.
You know, with respect to storms and sea storms, the storm is now. We're in a storm. The earth is fighting back. I mean, I was away for a few days. I just got back from a trip to Vermont a few days ago. People had been texting me about a site near where I live that had been gutted to build 2 hotels, a bunch of shopping stuff. I drove by the site on my way to a meeting yesterday, and it was almost like seeing a dead body on the side of the road. It was the worst thing I'd ever seen. The amount of technology that had been committed to just ripping out old oak trees and casting them aside to make room for something that, quite frankly, we already have too much of. We've got too many places to shop right now. And I was just, it was like an open wound on the earth. And there's so many of those. And like I said, as we all know, the earth is definitely pushing back. I've taken heart that we have these orcas that are biting off the rudders of boats, and they're teaching this wisdom to their offspring, right? I mean, this is where we are right now. There have to be consequences for this kind of arrogance, and we, I think, human beings are facing a comeuppance. We really can't detach ourselves from nature. We really are a part of it. And I do believe that the guiding movements right now on the planet, as far as the future of the earth, are mostly devoid of spirituality. And thus, they're not good habitats for people who are indigenous and people who come from a very different well of knowledge. I have a colleague locally who likes to stand up at meetings and announce that he's the local expert on water. And this guy only knows the science. In fact, that's his training. He's a scientist. He doesn't know squat about these resources if all he has at his disposal is the science, which of course gets people's hackles up in that community, right? Because they figure the moment you start pushing back, you're somehow a science denier, that you're not linked to reality, and which is not at all what I'm saying. I mean, I think you folks get exactly what I'm saying, is there has to be some humility, right? These land acknowledgments that I hear at every environmental meeting don't even come close to really acknowledging the import and the significance of these resources. And so we need to reboot. And if we don't, frankly, the earth will take it in tow. So there it is. The storm is now. We're heading for a big storm, and we're in that storm now.
I so appreciate what you just said, Fred, that the storm is now. What 4 arrows. Restoring the kinship worldview. How do we do that in this storm that we're in?
If I may, I will answer that with a really short flute song of the Shamagi people. And because it really answers the question,
Please
because
do.
the Trail of Tears was a storm like we're talking about. The Trail of Tears was a horror. And yet every night, the women who survived would sing this lullaby to the children. And I think the lullaby says an answer, gives an answer, offers an answer to your beautiful question, because the lyrics of it are something like this. Little one, I know this is tough, but did you see the beautiful clouds coming by, giving us the rain that refreshes us? Did you see the beautiful colors of the fish and the creek when we crossed it? And how that fish is keeping the waters clean? Did you hear the sounds of the birds that sing their song and teach it? And it went on and gave appreciation for the existence of our co-creation, and also that they were keeping their responsibility, and which we are not today. And so to just think about how it is that that women would sing such a powerful, beautiful, and positive song. And there wasn't hope. You know, Sitting Bull didn't have hope. When people said, how come with smallpox and the buffalo gone, you kept really doing your living and your art and your singing and your sun dances? And he simply said, because I'm a human being. And so I don't have a lot of hope that we can turn things around. I think hope is the assurance that whatever we're doing is the right thing to do, regardless of the outcome, and that there's this longer picture that this song said. So maybe just take 10 seconds and we'll just hear the sound of the women, the melody of the women's song. Well, time to go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The profound intelligence of the ignorance that you speak about, Alan, in the connection with the mamas, and having the strength of spirit and the audacity to claim that ignorance. That's part of that, that's water. To be able to identify the storm and yet ride the waves and do the work and touch the people and bring them into the consciousness of their own being and their own connection to the river. Fred, grandmother, the profound touch that you have with voice and with sound to identify the contradictions and smooth them out with healing words and with a healing message. 4 Arrows, you're continuing to bring us back to the traditions of the Lakota, to bring us back to the ways of people who lived in harmony and still live in harmony with nature, given the storm that we are facing. Socks, the consciousness to bring this project so that people who share the work of healing can have the platform in the arena to speak to one another and to form the relationships, because the relationships are the water. The relationships are the human water. And to have that, to bring that gift to the world. And Kelsey, to have the light within you to be able to manage and pull all these variant streams together. I so appreciate just the opportunity to be here with all of you this morning and to celebrate the gift of water, the water that I can feel on my skin sitting here in this room.
And K2, the griot who hears each of these threads and knows how to weave them together in such an extraordinary way so that each voice, each thread is really seen and yet interwoven in such a deep way with the others. This is a great gift that you've given us this morning. Such gratitude.
It's been rewarding being with you. Thank you very much indeed.
Let's check out. We check in and we check out. We check in to let the people who are present know that we are in the room and in the space and in our bodies and present. We check out to let them know that we're still here and we're taking what we've gained here. We've taken the gift of this out into whatever our next phase of contact will be.
We will be going out. The grandfathers and grandmothers are waiting for us to pour the Miwachoni, the water. And I cannot thank you enough for the wisdom that you have shared with the boys and with me and with the world. And we will be taking that into the lodge and sending that out to everyone. And Alan, let's get together soon.
Please, thank you.
Peace.
I think there's only one fight in front of us, a lifetime of activism, 20 years of that as a riverkeeper. I know that the world is in the grip of a social and economic system designed to protect capitalism. And I assure you, if you can't say that word out loud, you sure as hell can't fight it. So, right? So ultimately, and people confuse that. People have a lot of confused ideas about what that means. Maybe people think I'm talking about I'm anti-money. That's ridiculous. What I'm really saying is I'm against exploitation, because if capitalism gave us racism, sexism, classism, all those isms, all right? And unfortunately, sometimes environmentalism is in there too. It's a tool of capitalism. So until we can fight and win that fight, I don't know that we're going to change the fate of this world, but we have to be able to acknowledge that an exploitive economic and social system is the root of all of these problems. Reducing everything around us to money is essentially what that system is about. And it's shredding this planet apart on so many levels.
Grandmother.
So yes, that is so true. And that exploitation, I was just listening to something where they were talking about all of the celebrities that have swooped down on Maui and are buying up land like there's no tomorrow. Very famous corporate people and I suppose it icons that have no feeling. Your president of your United States, who just smirked when they asked him what he had to say about the fires in Maui, and they were still just recovering bodies and still are. And then he's going to crow about he's sending trillions to Ukraine, but $750 per person in Maui. There's so much wrong, so much out of order that it's I don't lose hope, because I know there's a bigger power in this that's at work, but it is the need for ceremony and ritual, because if you don't have those things in your life, it becomes harder and harder to slog through this reality that we've created. And I thank you and bless all of you, because we made a decision before we came into this consciousness to meet each other and to help each other and walk this walk together. And so thank you for showing up, because we need each other. But I really feel like years ago, Nana Vilma Cholakchikol, who is a Mayan elder, and she said, if you want to know the condition of women, look at the condition of the earth, because she mirrors her plight in the women's bodies when they were and still are decimating mountains. There was such a jump in breast cancer that when they started extracting so much from mines and all this other stuff, and then there was all this, uterine problems and birth problems. And she said, it's the way that the earth is so connected to the women are one, and water's pollution and all these blood disorders. And, all you have to do is look at our human bodies to see what the result of doing these things to the earth is. And I just keep the faith that, we have programmed something better. And then I'm going to go into the fifth dimensional jump, and who wants to stay here? You're welcome to it. No, but I really feel like, if nothing else comes on my part out of this conversation, it is that go to the water. There are water keepers. There are people that walk around with gourds of water on the Rio Grande that pray every day. There are people you'll never know that they even exist, but they are holding that energy and those prayers with the water every day, doing their rituals, doing their ceremony. And they are, and I think with Alan and the Kogi, that was one of the things, the message, I forget exactly how it was called, from the elder brother. When I saw that, when it first came out, I was like, boom, okay. When they closed that gate and said, we cannot bear this anymore, and the Aboriginal people said the same thing. We're not going to continue to have children because we cannot hold this energy. A friend of mine, Kathy Kamutia, she passed, she went to the Amazon and she met with the 5 low contact tribes there. And the same message came over and over and over. We have held these places as long as we can, but we cannot continue to hold. Everybody else has to step up to the plate now and do their part. And so I encourage people to please step up. Or I'm okay with what happens either way, but if you want to stay here, do your part. It's not just not having water bottles, individual water bottles. And Fred can tell you that that's not the biggest polluter. It's something, we need to address, but there are much larger things that we have to be conscious of and do something about.
I just want to throw in that whenever I feel that I have the right to despair, the Kogi say, if we thought there was no hope, we wouldn't be bothering talking to you. But we are.
Exactly. Exactly. And thank you for listening and bringing that film. That is one of my most favorite pieces of film and documentation that I've ever seen, because it really put people on point to those that could hear and see. Thank you for taking that journey to go and bring that back to the world.
All right. Sachs?
Yes. Well, I just want to echo what I heard Fred say early on, which is I'm naturally attracted to community. And I want to say this is our effort to try to find ways to bridge community across the waters, right? And I hope that it finds a way to continue and expand. And I'm grateful for everyone on this call, and especially the people who were bringing us together, K2 and Kelsey, this morning. Checked out.
All right. Kels, turn it over to you.
Just so grateful for everyone, all of your valuable, unique perspectives and contributions to not only this conversation, but the collective healing of all of the other communities that you're a part of, and coming forth today to share our deep interest and dedication to continuing to learn from one another and the broader Indigenous, Maroon, and Earth knowledge that we are all holding space for through Proven Sustainable as well. So just feeling very grateful for everyone who has taken part, and amazed by all of the insightful ideas, experiences, stories, and thoughts to go forth with.
Thank you all. Peace and respect, and have a great walk through the rest of this day and the rest of your life until we get together again. Peace.
You too. Peace.
Peace. Thank you very much, sir.